So your colleague and friend, Dr. Clotilde Pontecorvo,
Oh, what did she say? She's hysterical.
she describes you as the international leading person in educational psychology, noting that you were very brave to depart from your original training and research in psychology of mathematical learning and teaching to discover the relevant role of language and discourse in school
So
classroom.
she was a heavy partner of mine in doing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your colleague and friend, Dr. Carolyn Rose, notes that she always associates you with accountable talk, which is a classroom discussion facilitation technique that formed the foundation of your joint work with her. She explains that you always believe in almost magical qualities associated with accountable talk, and that your talks related to this always have a sort of evangelistic flair.
Yeah, and she's younger, so she can't afford to do that.
Your singular dedication to bringing accountable talk to urban classrooms was the kind of determination that was required to make something positive happen in challenging environments. What research remains to be in this area? You just
I just
mentioned
told you, really,
that it really
what
has.
I think.
It's
Yeah, I mean, I
wide.
think we now know that this can work. With Carolyn, it's been a really, really interesting and fun collaboration. She's much younger than I am. She's a computer scientist. And so she's interested in every new move within computer science. Coursera, for example. Our provost asked if I would develop a Coursera course at a point when the provost was willing to back such courses at Pitt. And then Carolyn, hearing that we were going to do it, said, "Can I study it?" And the answer was yes. And I had two other colleagues actually doing building the course and running the discussion groups. It was one thing that became very clear, and that's Carolyn who made it absolutely visible, is that whatever the lectures were, which I actually don't think we should have been doing at all, I'll say why in a minute, the evidence shows that it was the quality of the talk in the guided discussion groups that made a difference. And that if that quality of talk, if it either didn't happen or wasn't very good, basically people dropped out of the whole course. That was what was keeping it alive. And there are several other studies that have shown something like that. But now, there's something else showing up, not my work, but good computer scientists, not local ones at the moment, showing that it might be possible for a robot to run those sessions, which seems bizarre to me, but it fits the theory, because the theory tells us that it's the sense that the listeners make of a question, not necessarily the sense that the poser of the question is making. I don't know how, I lost my grammar here. So if that's true, if it's the sense maker that the listener is, if the sense making that the listener is doing is the critical piece of this, then why not a robot with relatively random questions?
Sure.
Now, Carolyn won't say that, and the guy who's done most of this work, who's a computer scientist from, I forget which university in Philadelphia, is much too cautious to say it to me, but I think they both believe it. I think they're both getting to this place. And that would really be astounding, because now a student could have a conversation with a robot that does some of the same work that accountable talk does. Because the robot would say, randomly probably, I don't know any way to program the robot to do this, I would say, why do you think that? Or, I'm not sure I agree with you. Or any one of a dozen different phrases that seem to lead in natural conversation to a person trying to explain himself or herself. right? I mean, that could
Theoretically, right.
be theoretically.
Right.
Whether we're there, I don't know. I have to get some
Get to
time
see
with
some proof.
Yeah, I have to get some time with some of these people
And some
So-
of the robots.
and some of the robots. But so Carolyn's actually rather conservative, and she won't be in 10 years, but she is now. And
Your former postdoctoral student, Dr. Baruch Schwartz, cites two of your main most significant contributions to the profession, the first of which is your founding of the large community of scientists in the learning sciences. He notes that you began your career as B.F. Skinner's PhD student,
he knows that story.
continued your career as a student of Jerome Bruner that we discussed
yeah.
earlier, and who we've also interviewed on this show a couple years ago.
Good.
And
Glad
then
you
Al
got to it before he
passed away, yes, recently. Then Alan Newell's. This extraordinary shift from behaviorism to the cognitive revolution gave to you a very broad perspective about learning and instruction. He adds that you are one of the promoters of a new shift in the learning sciences, the adoption of a socio-cultural perspective towards situated learning. Just can you describe this shift for us, but also in terms of where we are in the learning
Well, that's
sciences?
the learning in school and out thing. That's the shift I was describing. I think it's when Baruch came about 10 years later, I guess, as my postdoc. He's arguably the world's leader in this field at this time. So he was a French-trained mathematician who decided to leave France as a Jew for the reasons that Jews were leaving France at that time. He moved to Israel and settled in, and quickly became aware that there were too many good mathematicians in Israel. And he was good, but he wasn't great. So he decided to become a math educator. And then he learned that you had to come to America to round out your credentials as an Israeli. So he ended up with
Studying
me. I don't know how he got. I can't remember what the route was that he got here with. But we're really quite close friends now. But what's the question?
So in terms of the work with the learning sciences,
how did it happen?
Where are you headed in terms of
where am I
work?
headed?
Yes.
Well, the learning sciences was anybody's guess of what it would be if you looked 20 or 30 years ago. Cognitive science was the forerunner. And cognitive science was a merger of psychology, philosophy, linguistics, and something else.
Okay.
But it didn't really have education in it. It did have learning because psychology brought that.
Sure.
But there is a fourth leg to the chair of cognitive science. But basically, it's when a next generation came in and knew that cognitive science, with a heavy grounding in computer science, was part of the future. That they wanted to figure out how to make their interest in learning, specifically in school. This is something of a fight that I'm having. I mean, a good fight, not a fight, but an argument with the learning sciences world. I think it's too focused on schools at this point. So that's what happened with learning sciences. School learning became an addition to the cognitive science. And it's not a fully merged field. And probably that's a good thing, because learning sciences has to get close to classroom and classroom preparation reality. And there's a big movement to do that right now.
Right.
But I don't think they're really very close to classroom. I don't notice a lot of classroom savvy people joining learning sciences research grants. We didn't have a clear body of data to show it. Despite the availability of what is pretty intensive coaching, only one classroom out of about 30 that were initially engaged was doing anything like accountable talk by the end of the school year. And finally I said, we have to say this in the article that we write to publish these results, because if people keep on doing this again and again, they're going to get the same results. If you run a big enough sample, you're going to get positive results. But it's not going to change education. And this is happening in Europe as well as here. So we're now looking for another way. Now, I have a hypothesis about what to do. I have no commitment to the particular hypothesis being right. But what I want is to see teachers themselves learning what to look for in their own behavior and their students. That means they should be doing the coding or the rating or whatever. I don't think rating scales work for this. That's a whole separate issue of how you take complicated data and reduce it.
Reduce it, right.
And if you do it using rating scales, what you do is let intuition join whatever training you've done. And that's the best we can do for almost everything. But now for accountable talk, we can do a lot better. We know at least 8 specific things that teachers do that produce these effects. And once you do that, then you're coding rather than rating.
Sure, right.
So,
you're opening that
the
up.
Difference? And once we got to that, the idea that the teachers could code themselves and their kids became an obvious hypothesis, not yet tested. That's what we're about to work on.
Common sense is on your side on this one.
Well, common sense is on our side, but it's in competition in America, perhaps less in Europe, in some parts of Europe, with the crazy testing that's going on,
right,
which is not friendly to this kind of discussion. Actually, you could do accountable talk on test items.
Absolutely.
You could. And that might be one variant that we would do. You let the kids argue out what item they want.
What it means to be right.
Yeah, what it means to be right would be a good way to say it. And let them argue about it. But I doubt that many schools would let them use the midterm or even quarterly testing in that way. And I don't want to add more test items into the program.
Right.
So,
or more focus on the tests.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we could get schools that are going to be giving the tests to allow kids to answer them jointly and have us or the teacher, I don't know who exactly, I have to work this out, record it, I would go for that. And we might. We have school districts who are ready to do some of the most amazing things if their state laws will allow them to it. Sometimes we have to work with them to get bypasses of the state law. We know how to do that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But what I want is for teachers to be able to feel in themselves, in effect, judge their own performance. And I believe that people can become good at that if they're coached in it in a non-hostile environment, and that then they'll just be good at it, that you won't need to keep supporting them. So I'm open to any way that anybody has to do that.
But that's where you intend to move here in this area of research.
That's what I want to do.
In terms of your educational policy, which we've kind of walked right into that and talking about how state level policies that are also often dictated by federal policies are kind of restricting some of this work in terms of priorities.
I don't think the federal policies do that. I think this is a part of the politics of fighting against control.
Federal
policies do not ask states to give the tests 4 times a year.
Right. And if anything, they've lightened up with the passage of Every Student Succeeds Act.
Yes, but even
Yeah.
before, all they wanted was the once a year. I mean, but No Child Left Behind worked out differently than many of us had hoped. I mean, one of the things that helped get No Child Behind through was Kati Haycock. You know who she is?
No.
Well, she's an education activist who had been working on various equality issues in California. And a few years before that Bush came into
George
power.
W.
Yeah, she decided to move. I don't actually. If you want to
Right.
look this up, I'll tell you how.
Right.
I don't know the exact dates. She thought it was time for her to move into the Washington mainstream, so she moved her operations into Washington and agreed to collaborate with Bush, and I believe had real influence on him. It's one reason that the laws, the actual No Child Left Behind laws, were not as crazy as they are made out to be. They weren't the best possible laws, but they were. There was room in them for sensible work. But when it got to the states, then those test scores began to affect actual funding patterns from the states to the districts. And the districts panicked and said, oh, the best thing to do is to test several times before the test that counts, and then we can adjust the curriculum. I don't think Kati liked that much. I liked it very little. She didn't feel she could influence. Well, I don't know. I mean, we tried to stay in touch. When New Standards was still going, then Kati was a friend. When New Standards died, which was because of No Child Left Behind, and not that it attacked No Child Left Behind, not that No Child Left Behind attacked New Standards, but it de facto had the effect of wanting the kinds of tests that the test companies could sell. And that's not the business New Standards was in. So at a certain point, we had to just close shop. And we did. And that was pretty early. I mean, that's going to be I don't remember.
2002.
2002 is that, you know the tape better than I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your colleague and friend, Dr. James Greeno, describes your commitment to and understanding of the advancement of science and your founding of the leading journal for research in learning and cognition as having contributed greatly to the advancement of the scientific knowledge base of education. He also notes that your founding and administrative leadership of the Institute for Learning and your interaction with educational policymakers have contributed greatly to the Society's process of considering both the need for and the possibilities for change in educational practice. What are you most proud in terms of your accomplishments in the ways that your research has been picked up in educational practice and or policy?
This is actually a problem because I don't think it has been picked up in any deep way. Accountable talk is only one part of it. If you take let me just stay in math for a minute, where a lot of good work has gone on, but most math curricula that are on the market from companies, you wouldn't know that all of this research on mathematics learning had taken place. Or maybe you would guess it if you looked at the extra problem at the end of a unit for suggested work. But the idea that computational skill, which is still a very central part of the tests, had to take precedence over understanding the mathematics is not widely accepted. I think it's better than 10 years ago, or certainly than 15 years ago. But it's not there between teachers who haven't been well educated, and I'll call them teachers all the way up through superintendents, or at least up through directors of curriculum. Superintendents might come in from a different route. It's just, it's still astonishingly not part of teaching. It's about teaching more than it's about learning, is all I can say. And that's what most of the training is about. So there's a whole new venture somewhere going on that's trying to get teachers better prepared.
Right.
And it's about, they call it classroom management. And that's where they put accountable talk. Well, in a way, that's right. Managing your class as a discussion is a classroom management problem. But if you put it together with all the other management issues that teachers have to learn how to deal with, they're never going to get to what's the best way to discuss an equation.
Right.
So, I mean, that it's even in use. We Institute runs an annual get-together for, it's open to any district that's working with us. They can send any kind of delegation they want. I think it's at their cost, so I mean, if they want to send 20 people, we would receive them. If you start to talk about the problem facing teachers as a classroom management problem, you'll get, certain things will happen that are better than now. Gloria Ladson-Billings tells us what they are. Her stuff is just spectacular. But it's not deeply focused in the content. It's focused in the bonding of teachers, not just with children, but with adults. Do you know, is she one of the people you've interviewed?
No, but she's on the list.
Yeah, I mean, you need to read her book. I've read it twice, I guess, in 2 different editions. It's a stunning book because its basic message is, if you want to be a good teacher of black kids, you have to really like black people. And that doesn't just mean cute children, it means their parents and their older siblings. And she develops that in a way that I think is, it's so compelling to me that it's just, would be my first required piece of reading if I were preparing teachers. Now, I've lost track of the question that I'm asking.
Well, you're still on the,
yeah.
And you did mention something, the Institute for Learning. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
It was founded, it was an outgrowth of New Standards. New Standards operated by inviting states and some school districts to join us and become dues-paying members. And then there were foundations that were matching the dues. We raised a lot of money. We had a considerable influence, power, not formal power, but influence, in the mid-90s. And we were constantly saying that this is about new standards. It's not about new testing. And one day at one of our summer events where we had delegations from many states and school districts, and also a lot of scholars used to come to them, because we had an advisory board that I think was pretty widely open to anybody who expressed real interest in our work. One of the things I loved about it was that, help me with the great statistician from Stanford.
Kronbach?
Yeah, Lee Kronbach at one point called me up. He said, "How come I'm not on your advisory board?" And I said, "Lee, I have heard you're not in such good health, and I didn't think I should bother you. He said, you won't be bothering me, just tell me where to come, I'm coming. And he came. And that kind of thing was happening.
Sure.
And he wasn't the only one, but I just especially loved it because he was such a curmudgeon. And so at one of those meetings, several school superintendents who were there said, we want to have dinner with you off in a corner where nobody else will hear us. Okay, I knew something was going to happen. And they said, listen, you invited us into this. You said it was going to be about a future of learning via new forms of standards and accountability, but we're not hearing anything about learning. What are you going to do about it? And I said, I don't know. But if you want to come to Pittsburgh for a few days later in the summer, we could talk about it. And they said, okay. Is there anything else we need to know? So we set a date. I said, well, one thing you need to know is that I can't really take the money for this out of new standards. So can you guys help? And all of them said, we'll find it in our own budgets to come, as long as you can host it. So we split the costs, basically. So they came, and this began a discussion that led to the Institute for Learning. And Tony Alvarado was my co-founder. He was the one. He was looking for a new job. He felt he had done his best work in District 2.
In New York.
Want to do something new. And so he said, sure, I'll work with you on this. And that was a fabulous collaboration because he's utterly brilliant and utterly a practitioner.
Right,
no interest in scholarship. It's not that he's disinterested in the findings of scholarship, but he couldn't imagine how any of us could live in the scholarly world.
Coming from a practitioner.
Yeah, and he understood politics very well. So that was a great collaborator for me. And then quite a few of the other superintendents became close collaborators as well. Tony drifted away. Didn't just drift. He decided to take on a new role in San Diego, and he couldn't work with me at the same time.
Sure.
He still continued to work with me, but not as co-director.
Sure.
So we're talking about. You have to remind me again.
So your friend, well, it was the Institute for Learning, but your friend and colleague, Dr. David Clark, notes that in addition to your substantial scientific skills, you are a master administrator, which you also have been here as well at the college or the university, proselytizer, and advocate for your scientific and administrative agenda. How would you define your scientific and administrative agenda?
I'm trying to figure out what David meant by putting those two together. I mean, the scientific agenda is like anybody's scientific agenda, except that I'm wandering over larger territory than even many of, not larger than all members of this community that you're interviewing, but larger than many. That means I need collaborators from their worlds. And it's heavily a scientific world, and so I've learned how to talk with all kinds of scientists, cognitive scientists and other kinds of scientists with an interest here. So I have to learn how to understand their criteria and their ways of working. With the practitioners, it's different. It's making sure that we hear them. And they don't feel very heard, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
That we're hearing them and trying to solve the problems that they consider their central problems. They're willing to hear us say, well, the real problem is you have to work on understanding, not just skilled, mindless performance. And the kind of people who will work with us get that. But then you have to figure out, and you can only do it by talking with them, visiting them, I mean, being colleagues. So what's in the way of doing what we're talking about? Oh, well, there's the school board election coming up. There's the state laws coming up. There's the this and the that. And you have to figure out how to have a real conversation about those things with people who won't move any closer to being scholars than I will move to being a school superintendent.
Right.
And so you begin to find some school superintendents who want to hear the science, but they don't want to do it. I mean, and they may even want to have it done under their in their domain. One of the people like that was Pat. It'll come to me. He was
okay.
superintendent of Austin for a long time. Pat, not Soupies, but it'll come. So, I mean, we did a lot of research in Austin because he made it happen. He understood how it was getting off course because nobody wanted to be in the control groups. And he said, I think I have to give them something else to do that is a reasonable thing to try, and pit it against what you're doing, right? And so we would make those kind of arrangements. So the school superintendents that I worked with were great activists and great politicians. Pat, for example, when he first went to Austin, a few weeks later gave me a call. He said, I need you here. I mean, he was already signed on to work with us. He said, I need you here. There's a whole organizing thing going on that is organizing Hispanics and also some blacks to be really activists in education. And it could be hard for us, but the organizer says he knows you. So would you come to Austin and have dinner with us, the two of us, and see if we can find a way to make this really work for Austin? So I went to Austin. We had a great dinner along with a couple of major business people in the city. This guy is a real left-wing activist, but he wanted it to work rather than to get into a book. So he would figure out how to make his organizing things work, and he and I then became colleagues. He later moved on to add California into his realm of activism, and there he was associated with the teachers union. In Texas, there wasn't a powerful teachers union, so that isn't something he had to face up with. In California, he did, and he thought maybe I could help with that, which I could have if it had been Al Shanker, who understood. I mean, there really are two very different organizing traditions in American education. And Shanker represents the trade union, which is used to training, being responsible for training its skilled people and for evaluating them. If they're not working right on the jobs, they're a union. The relationships can be terminated. And Shanker understood that. And the AFT was organized as a trade union. But most American unions are organized as industrial unions, which once you're in a job, you got it for life kind of thing. And so Ernie and I were trying to think that through, because he suddenly found himself, as he was doing organizing work of the same kind Texas, as in Texas, faced with a completely different kind of union structure. I don't think I helped him very much, but because I was busy in Los Angeles working with Roy Romer, I was there a lot, and we used to get together and try to figure things out. I was at least a good sounding board for. So one thing leads to another.
Sure.
People who are doing the practical work, and this goes way down to, it could go to teachers themselves, but it certainly goes to the coaches and other people in the intermediate roles in district. They're pretty lonesome. And the next level up sits pretty heavily on them, even if they're well liked by the next level up. And the next level down mistrusts them. That's true everywhere, and to some degree. And they need somebody that they can unwind with, even if it's nothing more than that, nothing more than, I'll listen to your sad story if you'll listen to mine, and then I'll be better able to deal with my life tomorrow. But once you're doing that, it starts to lead to ideas to what to do together.